Liberty Ledger, where freedom meets the facts. Truth, uncompromised, America first.
Nancy Pelosi stepped onto the CNN stage, expecting to take down someone she considered a traitor to the Democratic Party. Little did she know she was the one about to be dismantled by a woman who'd witnessed her corruption firsthand for years. Everything about the setup seemed tailor-made for Pelosi. CNN had billed the event as a look at leadership and accountability regarding the future of the Democratic Party. The visuals were carefully crafted to give her a distinguished, statesman-like appearance. She was cast as the seasoned veteran graciously dealing with a young rebel who'd walked away from the party. She had already sat through countless pre-interviews, polished her talking points with consultants, and rehearsed that condescending smirk in front of a mirror. Her narrative was locked and loaded. To her, Tulsi Gabbard was nothing more than a traitor and a Putin apologist who traded democratic principles for Republican cash. What Pelosi failed to realize was that Tulsi Gabbard had spent 6 years in the House watching exactly how she operated. That's 6 years of witnessing the corruption, the double standards, the insider trading, and the ways families were getting rich. 6 years of keeping track of it all. And while most Democrats lived in fear of Pelosi's talent for ending careers, Tulsi had already moved on from the party. She had nothing left to lose, and every reason to blow the whistle. The crowd in the room was divided. One half consisted of party loyalists there to cheer for Pelosi, while the other half was made up of independents and Republicans waiting to see if Tulsi could actually prove her claims. Even the moderator, Jake Tapper, seemed a bit on edge, and he definitely had reason to be. Pelosi opened up strong, her voice heavy with a very practiced sense of contempt. She claimed Tulsi turned her back on her party right when democracy itself was facing a major threat. She argued that Tulsi had walked away from their hard-won values, their coalition, and, quite honestly, basic decency. She accused her of joining a party built on insurrections and lies, and "Madam Speaker," Tulsi cut her off, her voice steady with that signature calm you only get from military service. Before we get into a debate about principles and values, let's take a look at your stock portfolio. The entire room fell dead silent. That smirk on Pelosi's face started to fade. Tulsi calmly opened a folder, drew out some papers, and gave a smile. One that wasn't mean-spirited, but radiated the confidence of someone who had done their research. I believe the American public deserves to know how someone manages to amass $120 million while living on a congressional salary. What followed next caused every defense contractor, tech executive, and career politician in D.C. to hold their breath in anticipation. This was about to get ugly. Tulsi laid out her documents with the same precision she would use for a high-level military briefing. Every single page was tagged, highlighted, and ready to be used. She glanced up at Pelosi with a look that wasn't quite a smile, but more like the face a prosecutor makes when they know they've got a guilty defendant. And the evidence was completely airtight. "Madam Speaker, you have been serving in Congress for 37 years. That is actually longer than I have even been alive. During that time, you've become one of the richest people in Congress, worth roughly $120 million based on recent disclosures, all while earning a salary of just $193,000 a year. I have to say, that's some pretty impressive financial management." She stopped for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle. "Perhaps you should write a book titled How to Build a $120 Million Fortune on a Government Salary. I'm certain it would be a huge hit, though the subtitle would probably have to be And How to Dodge Insider Trading Charges While Doing It." The audience began to buzz. Pelosi's expression hardened, yet she managed to keep her cool. She had been under fire plenty of times before. She had survived much worse than this. But Tulsi was just getting started with her presentation. Let's take a look at your husband, Paul Pelosi. He's a successful investor. Actually, very successful. In fact, he's extraordinarily successful. He's almost suspiciously successful, one might say. Tulsi then pulled out the first piece of evidence. In December 2020, your husband bought between $1 million and $5 million worth of Tesla call options. Those are basically bets that the stock price will rise, giving him the right to buy Tesla shares at a fixed price. She lifted the document high so the cameras could get a clear shot. Just 3 weeks later, a newly elected President Biden was preparing for office and announced an infrastructure plan filled with huge subsidies for electric cars. Tesla's stock price shot through the roof. Your husband walked away with millions of dollars. I suppose we should congratulate him on his impeccable timing. Pelosi tried to cut in, but Tulsi just kept right on going. In March 2021, your husband invested over $1 million into various tech stocks. These included Google, Amazon, and Apple, massive tech firms that were facing the threat of new antitrust laws. This was legislation that you, in your role as Speaker, had the power to either push forward or bury. And can you guess what happened? Those bills just disappeared. Tech stocks went on another massive run. Your family pocketed millions more. Once again, the timing was just perfect. Tulsi reached for yet another document. In June 2021, Paul dropped $10 million on even more tech stocks. Within just a few weeks, major tech regulations that were making their way through committees suddenly hit a dead end. The legislation was effectively killed. Tech stocks continued to climb, and your family kept making money. Are we starting to notice a pattern here? She laid out a full timeline and held it up for everyone in the audience to see. In July 2021, you were questioned about banning stock trading for members of Congress. Do you remember what you said? To quote you, "We are a free market economy, and they should be allowed to participate." Talk about convenient. It's incredibly convenient for someone whose family has pocketed millions from suspiciously timed trades. Tulsi's voice grew even sharper. Over a 2-year period, your husband executed more than 50 trades. Almost every single one of them was profitable. Nearly all of them were perfectly synchronized with upcoming legislative actions. Statistically speaking, the odds of that being a mere coincidence are non-existent. We are looking at lottery-winning probabilities here. Except it didn't just happen once. It happened over and over again. She produced a stack of newspaper clippings. The New York Times has reported on this. The Wall Street Journal has documented this. Even media outlets on the left have called this out. Your defense has always remained the same. You claim your husband makes all his own investment decisions. You insist that you never discuss your professional work with him. Madam Speaker, do you really expect us to believe that you and your husband of 60 years never talk about your job? That he just happens to drop millions on specific bets right before you take action in Congress? That isn't a marriage. That is a criminal conspiracy protected by a marriage license. The crowd exploded, split between cheers and shouts of outrage. Tapper struggled to bring the room back to order. Pelosi's face shifted from composed to furious, her jaw clenched tight. "Representative Gabbard," Pelosi replied, her voice freezing over. "My husband's financial portfolio is entirely separate from my responsibilities as Speaker. He is a private investor who—" "Martha Stewart went to prison for far less," Tulsi interjected. Tulsi cut her off mid-sentence. She went away for a $45,000 insider trade. Just $45,000. Your family has hauled in millions. Millions of dollars, Madam Speaker. Yet somehow you think the rules don't apply to you. The woman who did time for lying about a $45,000 trade lost her entire career. But you stay on as Speaker of the House while your relatives get rich on trades that line up perfectly with your political agenda. Tulsi leaned in close. Back when I was in Congress as a Democrat in your own caucus, I co-sponsored a bill to stop members from trading individual stocks. You know exactly who stood in the way. It was you. You ensured it died in committee. You made certain it never saw the light of day for a vote. And why is that? It's because you're profiting far too much from this corruption. Because ending congressional stock trading would hit your family's bank account for millions. So, you guarded your own income while preaching to everyone else about ethics. She held up one last document. This is a formal letter from the Campaign Legal Center demanding a probe into your trading history. They have traced pattern after pattern of highly suspicious timing. They labeled them apparent conflicts of interest, which is just legal jargon for, "This looks like insider trading, but we can't prove it yet." But we all recognize what's really happening. Everyone watching at home knows exactly what this is. You have used your power as Speaker to line your family's pockets. That isn't what public service looks like. That is organized crime hiding behind a gavel. Pelosi attempted to fire back, trying to shift the focus to Tulsi's departure from the Democratic Party. But Tulsi refused to let her off the hook. Just answer the question. Madam Speaker, how did your husband know to load up on Tesla options right before those EV subsidies? How did he know to buy into tech stocks right before you blocked new regulations? Either he is the luckiest man in the history of Wall Street, or you are feeding him inside info. Which one is it? Total silence. Pelosi's mouth hung open, then shut, then opened again as she searched for words. Finally, she claimed this was all just a distraction from the real issues. Corruption is the real issue, Tulsi replied in a low voice. The American people deserve leaders who don't use their office to get wealthy. They deserve better than you. And that was only round one. Tulsi had 7 more ready to go. Make sure to share this. As soon as the cameras cut for a commercial, Pelosi was swamped by her staff. You could see them huddling around her, gesturing wildly and scrolling through their phones to find a way to respond. Tulsi sat there composed, checking her notes and taking a quiet sip of water. She looked like a veteran soldier prepping for the next stage of her mission, because that is exactly what this was. When the show returned, Tapper tried to move the conversation to safer territory. He suggested they discuss the events of January 6th and the ensuing investigation. That's perfect, Tulsi cut in. Let's talk about January 6th, because, Madam Speaker, you bring it up every chance you get. You call it an insurrection and the greatest threat to democracy since the Civil War. You've labeled it as planned terrorism and a literal attempt to topple the government. She took a moment and stared Pelosi right in the eye. I am a combat veteran. I have served on the ground in Iraq. I have seen what a real insurrection looks like. I have witnessed actual attempts to overthrow a government. January 6th was a riot, a violent, terrible riot. But let's look at your own role in that day. Let's talk about why it was permitted to happen in the first place. Pelosi's eyes turned into slits. I wasn't involved, but you were the Speaker of the House, Tulsi stated bluntly. The Speaker holds total authority over the Capitol Police. They manage the budget, greenlight key security measures, and supervise all Capitol safety protocols. That isn't just an opinion. It is a cold, hard fact. It's exactly what the job entails. She then produced a detailed timeline. Let's take a look at how this unfolded. During the weeks leading up to January 6th, the warnings were everywhere. Intelligence reports and social media were buzzing with threats of violence. Even the FBI raised the alarm. The Department of Homeland Security sent out its own alerts. Everyone was well aware that something was brewing. Tulsi raised a specific document for all to see. This is the official testimony from Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund. He swore under oath that he repeatedly asked for National Guard backup days before January 6th. He stated clearly that his requests were shot down. He claimed the House Sergeant at Arms, who answers directly to you, rejected his pleas. He explained that he simply couldn't get the green light for the resources he required. She then brought out another piece of evidence. This memo proves that President Trump offered to deploy 10,000 National Guard troops for January 6th. The Pentagon has already confirmed this fact. The Department of Defense backed it up as well. Trump's acting Secretary of Defense even testified to this under oath. 10,000 troops were on the table days before that date. So, who turned that offer down? It was your office, the Speaker's office. You were the one who said no. The room fell completely silent. At the time, this wasn't common knowledge. Most people were under the impression that Trump was the one refusing to send in the Guard. They didn't realize Pelosi had been the one refusing to accept them. Once the breach began on January 6th, Chief Sund called frantically begging for Guard support. The records show it took hours just to get a signature. Hours passed while Capitol Police were being swarmed, and hours ticked by as people forced their way into the building. Where were you during all those critical hours? Exactly what were you doing? Why on earth did it take so long? Tulsi's tone sharpened. Following the events of January 6th, you formed the special committee. You personally selected every single member. You blocked the representatives that the Republican leadership actually wanted on the panel. You maintained total control over every part of that probe. And do you want to know the truth? That committee never once looked into your own security lapses, your specific role, or your decisions. She held up an official report. The Inspector General released a report detailing the security failures of that day. It clearly documented massive failures at the leadership level. It stated that someone needed to answer for the intelligence gaps, the lack of resources, and the delayed response. Yet, you were never called in to testify. Nobody ever asked you the tough questions. Why is that? It's because you were the one running the investigation. Tulsi then produced one final document. This is a formal letter from congressional Republicans requesting that you save every single communication from January 6th. They explicitly asked for your emails, your texts, and your phone logs. And do you know what happened next? All those communications just vanished. Gone, deleted, and destroyed. You simply told the investigators that they were no longer in your possession. She glared at Pelosi with pure, unfiltered contempt. You had the power to stop January 6th from happening. You received the warnings. You were offered the necessary resources. You turned them all down. Then, when the attack finally occurred, an event you could have easily avoided, you turned it into nothing more than political theater. You spent 2 whole years investigating everyone except the one person actually responsible for security, yourself. Pelosi's face turned bright red. Now, the security of the Capitol isn't just one person's job. You controlled the budget, Tulsi cut in. You controlled the resources. You were the one approving or denying major security calls. You were offered 10,000 troops, and you said no. Chief Sund begged for backup, and you turned him away. Then, after people died, officers were hurt, and the Capitol was stormed. You blamed everyone but yourself. Tulsi stood tall, her military discipline on full display. "I've commanded troops myself. I have been directly responsible for their lives. When things go sideways on your watch, you don't get to point fingers at everyone else. You take responsibility, but you've never actually done that for anything, have you? You failed to protect the Capitol. Then you covered your tracks by rigging the investigation to ensure no one ever asked you the tough questions. That isn't leadership, Madam Speaker. That is cowardice. 2 rounds down, 2 total demolitions. Keep watching. It's about to get even worse for Pelosi." Tulsi could tell that Pelosi was genuinely rattled. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced by a defensive, simmering rage. Good. People make mistakes when they're angry. And Tulsi was just getting started. "Let's take a look back at 2020, Tulsi said, her tone shifting to something conversational and almost friendly, which only made it feel more threatening. "The COVID lockdowns. Remember all those small businesses that were destroyed? People weren't allowed to work. Children were barred from their classrooms. But the rules didn't seem to apply to everyone, did they?" She pulled up some security camera footage and put it right on the screens. It was August 31st, 2020, in San Francisco, a place called E-Salon. And look who's caught getting her hair done indoors without a mask. The video started rolling. There was Nancy Pelosi in plain sight, strolling through a salon that should have been shut down, getting a wash in style without a mask in sight. Your own city, the very one you represent, had strictly forbidden indoor salons from operating. Every salon was shuttered. Stylists were left without jobs. Business owners were watching their livelihoods crumble. But somehow, the rules didn't seem to apply to you. Tulsi let the clip continue. Erica Kios, the owner of the salon, was the one who went public with this security tape. She was absolutely livid. It wasn't about politics for her. She wasn't a political person at all. Her anger came from the fact that she was forced to shut her own doors. Her staff members were all out of work. She was watching everything she built slip away. And here was Nancy Pelosi, the woman backing these lockdowns, getting her hair done behind closed doors. The footage cut to black. Tulsi fixed her gaze on Pelosi. "Do you recall what you did next? You called a press conference, but it wasn't to apologize or admit to the double standard. Instead, you claimed you'd been set up. You insisted the whole thing was a trap. You actually demanded an apology from the salon owner, the very woman whose life was ruined by the mandates you chose to ignore." She produced several news clippings as evidence. Erica Kios began receiving death threats. There were thousands of them. People were targeting her, her family, and her shop. And all of this happened just because she showed the world your hypocrisy. She was forced to shut down her salon for good. She had no choice but to pack up and leave San Francisco. She eventually fled California altogether because she no longer felt safe staying there. Tulsi's voice trembled with a very real sense of fury. "The truth is, you effectively ruined that woman's life. She lost her livelihood. She lost her home. She had to run from her own state. And not once did you ever offer an apology. Not a single time. You shifted the blame onto her for your own choice to break the rules. You stood by while your followers harassed and terrorized her. Then you went right back on the air to demand even tougher restrictions for everyone else." She reached for more documentation. "At the same time, you're sitting on a fortune of $120 million. You own a mansion in the city, a winery in Napa Valley, and a place in D.C. You didn't feel the sting of those lockdowns. You got your hair styled. You went out to expensive dinners. You just went on living your life as usual. But for regular working folks, everything was taken away. Tulsi raised a sheet of paper. During the pandemic, 47% of small businesses in San Francisco were forced to close. Nearly half of them are gone forever. We're talking about cafes, stores, gyms, and salons. Thousands of jobs vanished, and lives were wrecked. And you championed every single mandate and restriction while you were out there breaking them yourself. She turned her eyes toward the lens. This is the real Nancy Pelosi. It's rules for the people, but not for her. She'll crush your business with mandates that she thinks she's above. She'll tear your life apart if you dare to call her out.
She'll even expect you to apologize when she's the one who got caught. She's worth $120 million and lives in luxury. Yet she has the nerve to lecture you about sacrifice while getting her hair done in a shuttered salon. Pelosi attempted to defend herself. That whole incident was blown way out of proportion. A woman lost her livelihood because of you, Tulsi said softly. Thousands of small business owners lost their life's work because of policies you pushed but never followed. You're sitting on a net worth of $120 million. You didn't have to suffer. You got your hair styled. You went to high-end dinners. You lived your life. But everyday working people? They lost everything. And when just one of them called you out for breaking your own rules,
You tried to destroy her. Tulsi leaned back in her chair. That is who you are. That is how you operate. You use your position to enrich yourself and steamroll anyone who stands in your way. Erica Kios had to learn that lesson the hard way. How many others are too terrified to speak up because they've seen what you do to your critics? Share this with every small business owner who remembers the lockdowns. The tension during the commercial break was palpable. Pelosi's team was in a total tailspin. They had completely underestimated Tulsi, her preparation and her fearlessness. They were scrambling. Tulsi was going over her next set of notes. This next part was really going to sting. This section implicated not just Pelosi, but the entire Democratic establishment, the intel community, and the press. But she had all the proof she needed. They returned from the break. Tapper looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Let's talk about the 2020 election, Tulsi began. Specifically, October of 2020. The New York Post had just broken the story about Hunter Biden's laptop. There were emails suggesting corruption, foreign business deals, and possible influence peddling. It was a massive story coming from a major news outlet. And then, something truly shocking happened. She produced a timeline of events. Within a matter of hours, the story was branded as Russian disinformation, not by the intel agencies or investigators, but by politicians, including you. Madam Speaker, Tulsi held up recordings of Pelosi's various TV appearances. You went on CNN, MSNBC, and all the networks. You claimed the laptop story was nothing but Russian propaganda. You insisted it was a Russian intelligence operation. You told the public not to pay it any attention. You were extremely vocal about that point. She laid the footage aside. Then, something even more shocking happened. 51 former intelligence officials signed a letter claiming the laptop story had all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. That document was funneled through a Democratic operative. The Biden campaign immediately used it to shut the story down. And social media companies suppressed the report entirely based on that single letter. Tulsi produced even more evidence. Twitter locked the New York Post's account for 2 weeks just for publishing a factual story. Facebook throttled the reach of the article, making it impossible to share. YouTube scrubbed videos discussing the topic. The news was effectively killed, censored, and erased based on a letter from spies claiming it was Russian propaganda. She looked directly at Pelosi. But there was just one major problem. The laptop was authentic. The FBI already had it. They had been in possession of it since December 2019. They knew full well it was genuine. They had already verified the emails were real. And they briefed Congress. They informed the intelligence committees. They even told the Gang of Eight. They told you. A heavy silence filled the room. This was a bombshell. You were well aware the laptop was real, Tulsi said in a low voice. The FBI had given you the briefing. You had the classified intelligence right in front of you. You knew it wasn't some Russian plot. Yet, you went on national television and lied to the public. You labeled it Russian disinformation. You helped suppress a true story from a major newspaper just 3 weeks before an election. She brought out the post-election data. After the vote, pollsters asked Biden supporters if they had heard about the laptop story. 17%, yes, 17%, admitted they wouldn't have voted for Biden if they'd known the truth. That represents millions of voters, more than enough to flip the results in several swing states. Tulsi's tone sharpened. You meddled in an election. You, the intelligence community, and the tech giants worked together to hide the truth and manipulate the outcome. That isn't how you protect democracy. That is how you destroy it. That is pure election interference. Pelosi just sat there, shaking her head. We had intelligence reports that suggested you already knew the laptop was real, Tulsi countered. Tulsi cut her off mid-sentence. The FBI had the device. They had already proven it was real. That Russian disinformation letter was signed by officials who never even saw the laptop or the evidence. It was a political setup, and you played your part. She grabbed the letter and held it high. This entire letter was coordinated with the Biden campaign. That fact has been proven. The officials who signed it later confessed they had zero proof of any Russian involvement. They just put their names on it because it served their political agenda. And you used that lie to silence the truth. Tulsi looked straight into the camera lens. Just imagine if the Republicans had pulled a stunt like this. Think about what would happen if Trump used intel officers to label a factual story as propaganda 3 weeks before an election. Picture social media companies banning the New York Times because of a letter from GOP-leaning officials. You would have screamed, fascism. You would have called it the death of our democracy. She turned her attention back to Pelosi. But when your side does it, it's suddenly okay. When you suppress the truth to get your candidate elected, it's considered acceptable. When you collude with spies and big tech to rig the narrative, you call it protecting democracy. The double standard is absolutely mind-blowing. Tulsi put her papers down. You helped bury a real story. You lied and called it a Russian hoax. You used your power to meddle in the democratic process. And then you spent the next 4 years preaching to the country about misinformation and saving democracy. You are the very misinformation you warn us about. You are the exact threat to democracy that you pretend to be fighting. That was round 4. Pelosi looked visibly rattled. Leave a comment if you remember this cover-up. Pelosi was struggling to keep it together now. Her staff was frantically waving for her to cut the meeting short and escape this massacre. But she was stuck. Walking out would only make her look guiltier. She was cornered. Tulsi didn't hold back. Let's discuss your family, Madam Speaker. Specifically, regarding your son, Paul Pelosi Jr. She then produced a folder detailing the family's business interests. Your son has had quite the career, highly profitable and incredibly well-connected. She flipped the folder open. Paul Jr. has held board positions at several different companies throughout the years. Everything from energy and tech to various biotech firms. That's quite an achievement for someone who isn't actually an expert in any of those industries. His only real resume builder seems to be his last name. Tulsi held up the corporate filings. Let's begin with the Viscoil Group. That's a Ukrainian energy firm. Paul Jr. landed a spot on their board back in the 2000s, right while you were serving as speaker. He didn't have any experience in energy or Ukraine, and his only real qualification was that his mother was one of the most powerful people in D.C., with total oversight of energy policy and foreign aid. She let that reality sink in. Does that sound familiar? It definitely should. It's the exact same pattern we saw with the Hunter Biden case. The son of a high-ranking politician lands a seat on a Ukrainian energy board without a shred of relevant background. He rakes in hundreds of thousands of dollars for it, and everyone just acts like it's a totally legitimate business deal. Tulsi reached for even more documents. But this goes way beyond just Ukraine. Paul Jr. has also been doing business with Chinese firms. He was involved with a company that had massive interests in China, right while you were the one controlling our trade and China policy. He even tagged along with you on official congressional trips to Asia. He was busy meeting with foreign officials during those very trips. He basically used your status to network his way into new business connections. She held up the photographic proof. Here is Paul Jr. in China with you as part of an official congressional delegation. Here is Paul Jr. again sitting down with Chinese business leaders. And here he is joining the board of a firm with deep ties to the Chinese market. All of this happened while you were Speaker of the House, wielding enormous influence over U.S.-China relations. Tulsi's tone turned ice cold. Back in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, Paul Jr. was linked to a company that cashed in on PPP loans. We're talking about taxpayer-funded pandemic relief money. This firm secured government cash at the exact moment his mother was writing the laws for COVID relief spending. Just another lucky coincidence, I'm sure. She laid out a full analysis of the pattern. Your son has pocketed millions from overseas companies that had a direct interest in what Congress was doing. He's held board positions in Ukraine, China, and beyond, while you were the one steering our policy toward those very nations. He's ridden on the back of your official travel to exploit your political power for his own gain. He's profited from pandemic relief funds while you were the one holding the purse strings. This is the textbook definition of corruption. Tulsi locked eyes with Pelosi. You dedicated 4 years to obsessively digging into the Trump family. You staged endless hearings on conflicts of interest, foreign business ties, and family members getting rich off the presidency. Yet the whole time, your own family was playing the exact same game. So where is the investigation into the Pelosi family? Pelosi attempted to push back. My son is just a private businessman. Well, so was Hunter Biden, Tulsi fired back. And so were the Trump kids. But somehow your family is the only one that gets a free pass. Your son isn't an energy expert, yet he sits on energy boards. He doesn't know international trade, yet he's doing deals in China. He doesn't have expertise in anything except being your son. That is his only real qualification, and that is why he gets these positions. Tulsi produced the financial statements. Your family's net worth has skyrocketed during your time in D.C. It's not just the stock market plays. It's your son's deals, your husband's investments, and every other way you've found to monetize your power. You've turned public service into a family enrichment scheme, she said, as she stood up. You went after the Trump family for much less than this. You labeled it corruption, a conflict of interest, and a total abuse of power. But when your family does it, you claim it's just business as usual. When your son profits from your status, you say that's perfectly fine. The level of hypocrisy here is absolutely sickening. Tulsi turned her gaze to the camera. Nancy Pelosi has spent 37 long years using her seat in Congress to line her family's pockets. From stock market trades and business deals to foreign ties and government contracts, she's used every possible loophole. Her family has squeezed every drop of profit out of her position. And yet, she has the nerve to lecture the rest of us on ethics. That was 5 rounds of absolute decimation. But Tulsi wasn't finished yet. Tulsi's expression hardened. This next part was personal. You could see it in her eyes, the look of a veteran who's worn the uniform, served in combat, and knows exactly what war looks like. And she was ready to call out someone who's been making money off of it. Madam Speaker, I am a combat veteran. I served on the ground in Iraq. I've been deployed into the heart of active war zones. I've seen firsthand the destruction war leaves behind for soldiers, civilians, and their families. So, let's talk about why you're so eager for military intervention, and then let's look at your defense stock portfolio. She brought out the voting history. You've held your seat in Congress for 37 years. And in all that time, you've voted for almost every single military operation. The Iraq War? You voted yes. Libya? You were all for it. Syria? You pushed hard for that one, too. You've voted to hike the military budget year after year after year. You've voted yes every single time. Tulsi held the record high. You've never seen a war you didn't like. You've never found a military intervention you were against. You've never cast a single vote against increasing defense spending. You are the very definition of a war hawk. And here is the reason why. She pulled the financial logs. Your family's investment portfolio is loaded with shares in defense contractors. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, these are the giants that rake in billions whenever America heads to war. These are the very firms that see their stocks skyrocket the moment military spending goes up. Tulsi laid out a detailed timeline. Let's take a closer look at the pattern here. In 2011, your family starts snatching up defense stocks. Right after that, you throw your support behind military intervention in Libya. Defense stocks go through the roof. Your family cashes in. In 2013, you buy even more defense shares. Then you start pushing for an intervention in Syria. Once again, those defense stocks soar. And once again, your family makes a fortune. She then brought out some more recent data. The war in Ukraine, February 2022. Russia launches its invasion. Within just weeks, your family is back to buying up defense stocks. Suddenly, you're the most vocal advocate for sending billions in military aid to Ukraine. You hammer through aid package after aid package. We're talking tens of billions of dollars for weapons, gear, and ammo. All of it is purchased from the very defense contractors your family is invested in. Tulsi's voice began to tremble with emotion. Every single bomb shipped to Ukraine is putting more money in your family's pockets. With every missile, every weapon system, and every military contract, your family turns a profit. You aren't standing with Ukraine because of your principles. You're backing this war because it's profitable. She held up even more documentation. When President Trump looked to pull out of Afghanistan, You stood in his way. You labeled the move as reckless. You insisted that we had to stay. And do you know why? It's because peace just doesn't pay. When a war ends, defense stocks take a hit. Your family loses money. So, you fought against ending a 2-decade war that had already claimed thousands of American lives. Tulsi's military discipline was now on full display. Standing tall, her voice commanded the room. I have personally been to war. I've watched young Americans return home in coffins, draped in the flag. I have stood at their funerals. I have met with the Gold Star families left behind. I understand the true cost of war, while you are simply profiting from it. She pointed a finger directly at Pelosi. You have never served your country. You have never worn the uniform. You've never been deployed. You've never been under fire. You have never seen the reality of combat. Yet, you are perfectly willing to send other people's children to die in wars that line your family's pockets. That isn't what patriotism looks like. That is war profiteering, plain and simple. Tulsi produced one last piece of evidence. This is a letter from Veterans for Peace demanding an investigation into your defense investments. They have documented exactly how your military policy votes consistently favor companies your family is invested in. They called it a clear conflict of interest. I call it blood money. She stared at Pelosi with nothing but pure contempt. You are profiting from war. Your family buys up defense stocks. Then you vote to send Americans to die in overseas conflicts. Every single intervention you've backed has made your family even wealthier. Every war you've pushed for has lined your own pockets. You are not a public servant. You're just a war profiteer in an expensive designer suit. Pelosi attempted to fire back. I stand for a strong national defense. I believe in defending America. Tulsi cut her off immediately. You should be defending America, not invading foreign lands just to boost defense contractor profits. There is a massive difference. I was the one wearing the uniform. I was the one who deployed. I've actually been in the combat zones where you send others while your family cashes in. You have never sacrificed a single thing. You've only ever profited from the sacrifices of everyone else. Tulsi's voice lowered significantly. Every time a soldier falls, every time a bomb hits, and every time a missile is fired, your family makes money. You've transformed American foreign policy into a personal profit center. You have monetized human conflict, yet you have the nerve to wrap yourself in the flag and call yourself a patriot. She shook her head in disbelief. You are no patriot. You're a war profiteer. And every veteran, every military family, and every American who has sacrificed for this country deserves to know exactly who you are and what you've done. Veterans need to share this. Pelosi needs to be held accountable for this. Pelosi looked as if she had just stepped out of a literal combat zone. Her makeup failed to mask the flush in her cheeks, the tightness in her jaw, or the slight shake in her hands as she reached for her water. But Tulsi had no intention of backing down. This was about making her answer for her actions, and she was going to get those answers. Madam Speaker, you held the gavel twice, from 2007 to 2011, and then again from 2019 to 2023. That's 6 years in total. Let's take a look at your legacy. Let's talk about what you actually got done during those 6 years. Tulsi pulled out the legislative records. Your first term as Speaker spanned both the Bush and Obama administrations. You promised the world healthcare reform, immigration overhaul, and new infrastructure. So, what did you actually deliver? Not a whole lot. The Affordable Care Act did pass, but even that was a deeply flawed and highly controversial mess. She set those records aside and produced a new set. But let's focus specifically on your second term. In January 2019, you took the Speaker's gavel once again. The Democrats were in control of the House. You held all the power. You had the golden opportunity to pass legislation that would actually solve problems and help the American people. But what did you choose to do instead? Tulsi held up the articles of impeachment. You spent your time impeaching President Trump twice. You spent your whole second term obsessed with ousting a president you couldn't stand. Just look at the actual numbers. She laid out a detailed breakdown. First impeachment, that Ukraine phone call. You kicked off the inquiry back in September 2019. After months of hearings, thousands of hours of testimony, and tens of millions in taxpayer cash, you finally impeached him in December 2019. Then came the Senate trial in January 2020. The end result? He was acquitted 52-48. It was a total failure. Tulsi didn't skip a beat. Second impeachment, January 2021. You charged him with inciting an insurrection following the events of January 6th. You rushed a vote only 1 week after the incident happened. No formal hearings, no real investigation, just a straight vote. The Senate trial took place in February 2021, even though he was already out of office. Once again, the result was an acquittal. The final tally was 57-43. Another failure for the books. She displayed a timeline covering everything from January 2019 to January 2023. In your 4 years as Speaker, you poured roughly 60% of your energy into impeachments, investigations, and trying to take down Trump. 60%. So, what about the remaining 40%? Tulsi produced the legislative records. On the border crisis, you did absolutely nothing. On immigration reform, you failed to pass a single thing. Regarding infrastructure, you blocked Trump's initiatives only to take credit when Biden signed a smaller version into law. Healthcare saw zero improvements. You actually fueled inflation with massive spending bills. You backed the defund the police movement while crime rates went through the roof. She fixed her gaze on Pelosi. Your legacy as Speaker boils down to 2 failed impeachments and padding your bank account through stock trades. That's the whole story. You didn't actually fix a thing. You didn't resolve a single problem. You wasted 4 years hunting a president you hated while real-world issues were left to rot. Tulsi produced a stack of news clippings. You claimed nothing was off-limits when it came to digging into Trump. You made that clear the very first day you stepped back into the Speaker's chair. You'd already made up your mind to impeach him before you even had the proof. This wasn't about proper oversight. It wasn't about holding anyone accountable. It was pure, unadulterated revenge. She held up the latest polling data. During that first impeachment, the public was completely torn. Roughly half of the country was against it. The second impeachment was even less popular with the people. You pushed forward anyway, just to hurt Trump politically, not because you had evidence of high crimes. Tulsi's tone grew even sterner. Do you remember who stood against that first impeachment? I did. I was still a proud Democrat back then. I was sitting right there in your caucus, and I voted present because I saw it for what it was, a political hit job disguised as a constitutional duty. You were absolutely livid. You came after me for it. But in the end, I was right, wasn't I? The Senate ended up acquitting him. Your impeachment crashed because it wasn't built on actual, removable offenses. She pulled out the official voting records. You had the chance to collaborate with Trump on infrastructure. He was ready to drop $1 trillion on it. You shut it down simply because you didn't want to hand him a victory. You could have made progress on immigration reform. He put deals on the table. You flat out refused to talk. You could have done something about the border crisis. Instead, you did nothing. Tulsi stood up. You prioritized your personal vendetta over your duty to the American people. You burned thousands of hours and millions of dollars on impeachments that ultimately failed. You achieved nothing except for driving the country even further apart. And now you have the nerve to lecture me about leaving the Democratic Party. She turned directly to the camera. Nancy Pelosi's legacy is defined by failure, failed impeachments, failed leadership, and failed policies. The only area where she truly succeeded was in making herself rich. That isn't a legacy to be proud of. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when someone clings to power for too long. One more round. The final blow was about to land. Tulsi took a deep breath. This was the moment. The very last round. It was time to put an end to this. Not just to win, but to make a statement that would shake D.C. for years to come. Madam Speaker, exactly how old are you? Pelosi's eyes narrowed in response. That's not relevant here. You're 84 years old, Tulsi countered. You were first elected to this Congress in 1987. That was 37 years ago. Ronald Reagan was still the president. The Berlin Wall hadn't even come down yet. The Soviet Union was still a global power. I hadn't even been born. She let the weight of that statement hang in the air. 37 long years in Congress, 37 years of grabbing power, hoarding wealth, and stacking up corruption. You've turned into the literal definition of everything wrong with Washington. You are the face of a broken system. Tulsi pulled up the data for Pelosi's own district. Let's take a look at San Francisco. It's your district, the city you've represented for nearly 4 decades. How's it actually holding up? She held up the cold, hard statistics. The homelessness crisis is at an all-time high. The drug epidemic has never been more devastating. Crime is spiraling out of control. The cost of living is now the highest in the entire country. Small businesses are running for the exits. The middle class can't even afford to live there anymore. Your own district has become impossible for anyone who isn't wealthy. Tulsi's voice cut through the room like a knife. You've been in charge of San Francisco for 37 years, and things have only gotten worse. Not a little bit better, decidedly worse. But through it all, you've somehow managed to get much richer. You started as a middle-class woman, and you're now worth a staggering $120 million. Your district fell into decay while you grew wealthy. That is your entire legacy in a nutshell. She brought forward more evidence. But this isn't just about your district. It's about the Democratic Party. You have sat at the helm of the party for decades. You're the one who decides committee seats. You're the one who controls the campaign funds. You decide which Democrats get supported and which get cast aside. You've created a gerontocracy where the same old faces stay in power forever. Tulsi held up some photographs. You are 84 years old. Steny Hoyer, your second in command, is 85. Jim Clyburn is 84. The Democratic leadership is comprised of octogenarians who simply refuse to retire. You are actively blocking younger members from reaching the top. You are clinging to power with an iron grip. Why is that? It's because you cannot imagine a life without it. She showed recent clips of Pelosi. Let's take a look at some of your latest public appearances. The footage began to play. There was Pelosi, tripping over her words, blanking on names, losing her place mid-sentence, and appearing confused about basic facts. Her age was showing in ways that were impossible to ignore. "You've diminished," Tulsi said softly. "Everyone can see it. You aren't as sharp as you once were. You're forgetting things. You're getting confused. But here you are, still running for re-election. At 84, you're asking for another 2-year term that would keep you in office until you're 86. Why, Tulsi wondered, as she stepped closer to Pelosi. It's because you simply cannot let go. You've become addicted to the power, the money, and the attention. You can't even picture yourself as Nancy Pelosi, private citizen. You've been in Congress longer than most Americans have even been alive. This career is all you know. This role is all you are." She presented the latest polling data. Your approval rating in your own district is only 52%. Barely half of your constituents actually approve of you. Nationwide, your approval is a meager 38%. But that doesn't faze you because you're in a safe district, and you control enough cash to bury any challenger. Tulsi's voice began to rise. You represent everything that is wrong with Washington. You're a career politician who has never held a real-world job. You've never built a company, never served in the military, and never worked outside of politics. Yet you've managed to amass over $100 million through insider trading. She laid out the full documentation. You've made a fortune off of war. You've swept scandals under the rug. You've shielded your corrupt family. You've used your position to enrich yourself while your own people suffer. You've maintained your grip by destroying anyone who dared to challenge you. And now you're simply too old to lead effectively. But you refuse to retire because you can't imagine life without that control. Tulsi stepped back and looked Pelosi straight in the eye. It is time for you to leave. It is time to retire. It is time to let someone else try to mend what you've torn apart. You've done quite enough damage already. You've made yourself rich enough. You've tainted the system enough. She looked toward the audience. The Democratic Party deserves better than what you're offering. Rising young Democrats deserve better than you blocking their path. America deserves better than octogenarians who can't remember their lines running the country. Veterans deserve better than war profiteers sending them into harm's way. Small business owners deserve better than hypocrites who ignore the very rules they create. Working people deserve better than insider traders getting wealthy off the laws they pass. Tulsi's voice was firm and final. Go home, Madam Speaker. Go back to your mansion. Go count your millions. Go enjoy your retirement years. But get out of the way and let someone who actually loves this country try to fix the mess you made. She produced one final document. This is a letter signed by 300 former staffers, people from Democratic offices calling for age and term limits for party leadership. They've witnessed the corruption firsthand. They've seen this gerontocracy in action. They know exactly how you operate, and they are demanding a change. Tulsi held the paper high. Even the people who worked for you and your friends think it's time for you to go. Even fellow Democrats think you've overstayed your welcome. Even those in your own party are sick of the corruption, the age, and your refusal to step aside. She set the letter down and gave Pelosi one last look. You are 84 years old. You've held on to power for 37 long years. In that time, you've become incredibly wealthy while your district has fallen into ruin. You've used corruption to enrich your own family. You've profited from the machinery of war. You've hidden the scandals. You've misused your authority. And you're still running for office because you just can't let go. Tulsi's voice was quiet, but it cut deep. The saddest part is that you're staying past your prime because you can't imagine a life without the spotlight. You can't even fathom being just another citizen. You need the power, the money, and the attention. You are hooked on it. And now, the Democratic Party and the entire country are paying the price for your addiction. She stood tall, her military discipline clear for all to see. History will not remember you as a trailblazer. History will remember you as a corrupt politician who overstayed her welcome and helped herself to far too much. You will go down as someone who built a fortune while the people she represented struggled. You'll be seen as a cautionary tale of what happens when we let leaders cling to power forever. Tulsi turned her gaze toward the lens. It is time for Nancy Pelosi to step down. Our country needs a new generation of leadership. We must finally put an end to this culture of corruption. From the insider trading and war profiteering to the family enrichment schemes, it all has to stop. The time for accountability is now. She turned back to face Pelosi. Are you going to retire, Madam Speaker? Will you finally step aside? Or are you going to clutch that power until it's pried from your cold, dead hands? Pelosi struggled to find an answer. Her lips parted. Words began to surface, but they were tangled and incoherent. She completely lost her train of thought in the middle of a sentence. She tried to restart, but faltered again. Her cognitive decline was obvious and truly painful to witness. Tulsi simply stood there, allowing the silence to amplify the moment. Finally, Pelosi managed to stammer, I've served this nation with honor and distinction. These attacks you're a traitor to everything we... She trailed off. She simply couldn't finish. The fatigue, the years, and the crushing weight of Tulsi's evidence were just too overwhelming. Tulsi's voice remained soft, yet it resonated through the dead silent room. You can't even put together a coherent defense anymore. That is the most tragic part of this. You are clinging to office long past the point of being able to do the job effectively. You can no longer finish your sentences. You are forgetting basic facts. You're clearly confused. Yet, you refuse to retire because your thirst for power outweighs the country's need for competent leadership. She shook her head in disappointment. The Democratic Party deserves better than this. America deserves better than this. Your own constituents deserve so much more. It's time to go, Madam Speaker. It is time. The video exploded online within minutes. I mean, literally minutes. People were live streaming it, cutting clips, and blasting it across every social platform. In just 2 hours, it hit 60 million views. Within a day, it had surged past 100 million. This wasn't just another political debate going viral. This was a defining cultural moment. The phrase, "Time to retire Nancy," trended at #1 globally for 3 days straight. And it wasn't just a U.S. phenomenon, it was worldwide. This calculated exposure of corruption and the image of a veteran taking down a war profiteer struck a chord across the entire political spectrum. CNN's post-debate analysis was a total disaster for Pelosi. Their own fact-checkers were forced to confirm almost everything Tulsi claimed. The stock trades were documented and verified. The security failures on January 6th were backed by multiple reports. There was video proof of the hair salon incident. The laptop cover-up was now a widely accepted fact. The family's business dealings were all part of the public record. Not even CNN could find a way to spin this. An exhausted Jake Tapper remarked, "No matter your opinion on Tulsi Gabbard, she showed up with the receipts for every single claim." This wasn't a standard political back and forth. It was a methodical presentation of cold, hard evidence. MSNBC tried their best to shield Pelosi, but even their own hosts looked visibly awkward. Rachel Maddow spent 20 minutes trying to downplay the stock trades, but her own financial experts had to admit the pattern looked incredibly suspicious and nearly impossible without insider info. The progressive wing of the party, who had resented Pelosi for years, wasted no time joining the fray. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted that some of the questions raised that night absolutely required answers. Bernie Sanders, when pressed for comment, stated flatly that members of Congress shouldn't be trading stocks, period. They had been waiting for someone to finally topple Pelosi, and Tulsi had just delivered the blow. However, the most telling reaction came from right in Pelosi's own backyard. Within 48 hours, polling showed her approval rating had tanked by 15 points. A staggering 62% of San Francisco voters said she shouldn't run for re-election. A progressive challenger announced her primary campaign within 3 days, citing the corruption Tulsi had laid bare. The financial fallout was instantaneous. Official ethics complaints were filed regarding the suspicious stock trades. The Campaign Legal Center formally called for a Department of Justice investigation. The SEC announced a review of trading activity involving members of Congress and their families. They even mentioned Nancy Pelosi by name in the official announcement. Her grip on the House vanished overnight. Other members simply stopped taking her calls. Committee chairs began making major moves without even checking with her. Young Democrats who had lived in fear of her power suddenly found their voices. Within a week, 3 members had already gone public calling for her to resign from Congress for good. Her speaking engagements vanished overnight. Universities that once paid her $50,000 for a single appearance started pulling out. Corporate organizers quickly found other speakers to fill the slots. The demand for Nancy Pelosi's wisdom disappeared once people realized it was tainted and used for personal gain. Her upcoming book on leadership and public service was promptly canceled by the publisher. They put out a statement about rethinking the project because of the recent revelations. Basically, they couldn't publish a book on ethics from someone who had just been exposed as a fraud. But the most symbolic moment of all happened 2 weeks after the big debate. Nancy Pelosi held a press conference to announce she wasn't running for re-election. She claimed it was her own choice to spend more time with her family after finishing her work. But everyone saw right through it. Tulsi Gabbard had effectively ended her career. At the press conference, Pelosi looked like a shell of her former self. It wasn't just physical. Even at 84, she looked completely defeated in spirit. The power that had fueled her for nearly 4 decades was simply gone. She took a few questions, dodged most of them, and left in a hurry. There were no grand tributes or celebrations of her service, just a quiet, embarrassing end to a career built on corruption. The Democratic establishment tried their best to salvage her legacy. They issued statements thanking her and calling her a trailblazer. But those words felt empty and obligatory. Everyone knew exactly what she really was. Tulsi had made sure of that. 6 months later, the DOJ's investigation into insider trading by members of Congress was still heating up. Pelosi's name kept showing up in the evidence over and over again. Her lawyers insisted she had done nothing wrong and that every trade was legal. But the pile of evidence was just too much to ignore. The pattern of behavior was crystal clear. And unlike in the past, she didn't have the political muscle to make the investigation disappear. Meanwhile, her district elected a progressive Democrat who promised ethics reform and an end to stock trading for politicians. In her victory speech, the new Congresswoman declared that the era of corruption was finally over. She followed that by saying the era of true accountability had begun. Tulsi Gabbard, for her part, didn't spend any time gloating. When people asked about the debate, she simply said she just brought the facts to light. She noted that Nancy Pelosi's career ended because of her own choices, not because of the debate. She felt her only job was to make sure the public saw what was really happening. But behind closed doors, friends said she felt a deep sense of justice. She had spent years watching the greed, the hypocrisy, and the profiteering from war. She had walked away from the Democratic Party because she couldn't tolerate being a part of it anymore. And she finally had the chance to pull back the curtain in front of the entire country. That debate eventually became a case study in political science courses. Academics analyzed it for its effectiveness and its strategic use of evidence. Professors used it to teach students about accountability and how to separate political spin from factual truth. But for the average American, the takeaway was much simpler. They watched a corrupt politician finally get exposed by someone with real integrity. They saw a combat soldier stand up to someone who profited from conflict. They watched a young leader call out an aging politician who represented the past. And they watched Nancy Pelosi, the most powerful woman in Washington for 2 decades, fall apart under the weight of her own scandals. Tulsi Gabbard achieved something incredible that evening. She dismantled the core of the establishment using nothing but facts and moral courage. Nancy Pelosi had spent 37 years padding her pockets and clinging to power at any price. Tulsi, a veteran who left the party in disgust, laid everything out for the world to see. She detailed the insider trading and the security failures on January 6th that were swept under the rug. She brought up the hair salon hypocrisy that crushed a small business owner's dreams. She mentioned the laptop cover-up that messed with a national election. She pointed out the family deals that made her son rich. She highlighted the millions made from defense stocks while wars raged on. She criticized the obsession with impeachment that went nowhere and wasted years of time. And she addressed the cognitive decline that made it clear she was no longer fit for office. Round after round, Tulsi laid out the facts. No rumors or anonymous sources, just financial records, footage, and testimony that even Pelosi's media allies couldn't ignore. Share this with anyone who's fed up with career politicians getting rich while the rest of the country suffers. Drop a comment below. Do you think we need term limits for Congress? Should members of the government be banned from trading stocks? Is it time for age limits in leadership positions? Because now that this is out in the open, these questions aren't going away. Tulsi Gabbard made sure of that. She brought an end to Nancy Pelosi's career, not with petty insults, but with the most dangerous weapon in politics: the truth. The time for accountability has finally arrived. It came through a combat veteran who had the courage to challenge power, the proof to back it up, and the heart to see it through. The Pelosi dynasty is officially over. The era of corruption she represented is coming to an end. And Americans are finally seeing what happens when someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove exposes the system for what it really is. The receipts don't lie, and Tulsi Gabbard brought every single one of them.